Студия устроена чуть-чуть. Долго играешь, просто все долго играет. Долго играет просто и все. Да. Да. Вот нам, да. Ну да. Вот нам, да. Долго вот нам. Да, вот она долго играет, да, да. Ну вот это и самое. Да, я понял. Ну да. Не важно, да наоборот. Да наоборот. А, ну нет, понятно. Наоборот. Серьезно? Там холодно, что ли? Там что, дымов в помещении нет, не отапливается, что ли? У меня не отапливается здесь. Как бы так. Удобно. Корпус. Больше хотел написать. Почту хотел проверить. Вы хотите океана?
Найдите работу на лучших условиях среди сотен тысяч вакансий на Авито. Например, с удобным графиком. Авито.
In this video, I'm going to share with you guys my top 10 things to know when eating in Japan. Japanese food is pretty awesome, as you guys already know from watching some of my previous videos. But in this video, I wanted to share with you guys some Japanese restaurant and Japanese eating tips. If you guys think any of these are weird, disagree, or agree, let me know in the comment section. Oh, and if you want to help support my channel, check out my Sushi-Do merch. I'll leave a link in the description of the video. All to help support my channel, check out my Sushi-Do merch. I'll leave a link in the description of the video. Alright, let's do this. So let's talk about sharing food in Japan. So Japan has kind of a weird standard when it comes to sharing food. So it really depends on the situation. In some situations, it's not okay to share, while other situations, it's okay to share, and in other situations, you're expected to share. Yeah, it's really confusing, right? First, where it's not okay to share. Here are some examples. So ramen shops with limited counter space is generally not okay to share. The reason why it's not okay is one, they have limited space, And two, they usually have a high turnover rate for customers, and they want to get customers in and out. And that one seat is really important for them to be able to make money on. So if you take up one of those seats and you don't buy a ramen bowl, that's one seat wasted for them. But this just doesn't only apply to ramen shops. Generally, if a restaurant has a set meal, places that also have limited spaces or whatever, when there's actually a long line and people are trying to get places that also have limited spaces or whatever, when there's actually a long line and people are trying to get in, especially during lunchtime, and you're probably gonna not want to share. Oh, and even nicer sushi restaurants expect you to order your own meal. On the other hand, where it's okay to share your food is places like fast food restaurants, family restaurants, and cafes. So coming from the US, it's generally expected when you go to a restaurant with friends that you go there and you order your own meal. At the end of the meal, you just pay for what you ordered. But in Japan, it's quite the opposite. When you go to a drinking restaurant, also known as an izakaya, and they expect you to share your food. And at the end, everyone just splits the bill, or the person with the most money sometimes pays if you're lucky. Now, if you have children, it gets a little bit more tricky. It's okay to eat in the places that I mentioned above, but again, you have to really consider what the restaurant thinks. My friends with kids, what they do is they actually call in advance to the restaurant to see if it's okay to share. Maybe that's going to be a little bit harder if you don't speak Japanese, but that's what Japanese people do. So if you don't speak Japanese, then you're just going to have to go into the shop and ask when you arrive. Basically, it's rude to go to a restaurant, order food, and not finish most of it. Not finishing sides, you get a pass, but it's considered extremely rude to not finish the main course. There is some gray area here. So for example, if you eat a ramen bowl,
Take down a lot of it, and you're super full, but there's still quite a bit left. Might be considered rude.
because it's still the appearance of not eating that much food on your plate. But if you're concerned with not being able to finish your meal, you can ask them to reduce the portion size, whether it be reducing the noodles or the rice, and they're happy to do it. It's completely fine. Oh, and one nice thing though is if you can't finish all your food, this is one time it's okay to share the food, just as long as the person you're with also ordered their own meal. What do you guys think? Japan is too strict? Alright, so let's talk about a Western pastime, customizing your meal at a restaurant. Customizing your meal in Japan is not very common, like requesting no meat in your dish or to take out all of the onions.
In general, Japanese people tend to not request changes to their meal because they think they'll offend the chef. But if you have an allergy, you should definitely tell them. Don't say allergy. They won't understand. Say arerugi, and then what you're allergic to.
And the reality of it, it's difficult to do it in Japanese as well. So my Japanese friend who doesn't eat any meat, she always has trouble at restaurants. For example, she'll ask the server whether or not the dish has any meat in it. If it does, she tries to ask if they're willing to take it out. The first problem is the server doesn't really know what's in the menu when it comes to a lot of the ingredients. So they'll have to ask the person who's making the food. People that are making the food are often just regular workers, so they're not able to change the menu up so easily. They just follow one recipe for that particular dish. As you can see, just going back and forth between the server, the cook, and yourself, and just trying to figure out what's in the meal, what they can actually change, is a lot of work just in Japanese. So if you're going to try to do this in English, then you're going to be fighting an uphill battle. And even though they agree to give my friend what she wants or what she ordered, when the dish comes, it's actually not what she wanted and there's meat inside. So all in all, you can try to customize your meal, but more than likely, you're going to have issues just like my Japanese friend. One caveat, if you go to the really nice restaurants, like for example, a nice sushi restaurant, and when you place your order with a server, they will ask you whether or not you have any allergies or if there's anything you can't eat. So maybe another route is just paying a little bit more and going to a restaurant that will accommodate your allergies or your diet. Alright, now here's some tips for my vegan fans. Just so you guys know, many Japanese dishes use broth that include meat or fish. Even some veggie dishes use broth that has meat or fish. There are restaurants though that do advertise a vegan menu, and those are the ones you should definitely look for. Otherwise, if it's not advertised, then more likely they're going to have broth with meat or fish. Also, kind of a funny thing, I've gone to restaurants with my vegan friend, and he's told them that he's vegan, and they actually asked him if fish was okay. The thing is, Japanese just don't have a lot of education when it comes to vegetarians. Many are unfamiliar or simply don't understand Western diets. My best suggestion for you is to do your research before going to any restaurants. The information is out there. What do you say before a meal? In all of the street videos, people are always asking, what is Maiko saying? She He's saying itadakimasu. Literally translates into receiving. So basically, Japanese people say this when they're receiving the food for the first time before they eat. The thing is, Japanese people are not saying it for any spiritual reason or they're really thankful that they're receiving the food. They just say it because that's what they've always done, that's what they were taught when they were kids, and it's just the thing to do. So if you want to be more like a local in Japan, then say itadakimasu before you eat. Alright, let's talk about the unwritten drinking rule in Japan. So when you go to a restaurant, especially at dinner, they actually expect you to order a drink, whether it be alcohol, soda, or even tea. So when you go to a restaurant and you order water, they might be a little bit surprised. Although it's not the worst thing in the world, it's just kind of weird. In fact, when I go to restaurants, sometimes I just order water when I don't feel like drinking. Hold on. The kids all just got ice cream. Actually, that might be a good thing. They're going to be quiet for a second so we can finish this. Alright, let's continue. And now when you guys go to restaurants and you see small water cups and the fact that they don't serve you water very often during your meal, you might know the reason why. So at the end of the day, if you want to be more local, then do the local thing and order a drink. Alright, now let's talk about slurping. This one is probably something you already know, but it's worth to cover anyway. Slurping noodles or soba in Japan is completely okay. In other cultures, it may seem rude, but it's not a problem here in Japan. But unlike what a lot of people believe, it doesn't mean that you're showing the chef that you really like their food. It's just what Japanese do, like Westerners using a steak knife to cut a steak. Let me know in the comment section if that's what you were told, because Westerners using a steak knife to cut a steak. Let me know in the comment section if that's what you were told, because I'd really like to know. Now let's talk about takeout boxes. Aside from fast food spots, takeout boxes are not very common in Japan. At the end of your meal, don't expect to be able to get a doggy bag to take home your leftovers. Generally in Japan, portions are served relatively small, so there's really never a case where you're gonna order way too much food, unless you just really go overboard. But Japanese people usually don't do that. That's maybe why Japanese have created the word toriaizu. Toriaizu means good for now when ordering in a restaurant. So when the server asks you if you'd like to order anything else, you can always say, I'm good for now, by saying toriaizu. Alright, so let's talk about this one. What you do at the end of your meal. At fast food restaurants, including ramen shops, you're expected to put away your plates and throw away your trash when you're done. For trash, sometimes you'll see a very involved process to throw away your items.
Liquids go here, plastic goes here, paper goes here, trays go here, plates go here, mugs go here, cups go here, and spoons and forks go here.
You can't just throw everything away in one bin. And for ramen shops, it's always good practice to return your bowl at the top counter when you're finished. If the shop has a return area, then it's always nice to return your plate and your trays there. Alright, now let's talk about money. Paying at the register. Many restaurants ask you to pay at the register instead of paying at your table when you finish your meal. Don't worry, there's no tips to worry about in this one. But one thing you should know is that there's usually a tray that's right next to the register where you're supposed to put your money or your credit card. Some Japanese don't like to transfer money by hand because they don't like being touched, so they prefer you using the tray instead. It's not necessarily rude to do so, but some people just prefer it. I personally handed over cash to cashiers and they've had no problem with it, while at other times I've had cashiers directly point to the tray and ask me to put the money on the tray. At the end of the day, it really depends on the person, but if you want to play it safe, then always put your money or your credit card on the tray. Plus, in Japan, the smallest bills are 1,000 yen, so you deal with a lot of coins. So it does help to put the coins on the tray to help keep you from fumbling around with the change when you're handing it over to the cashier. Alright, so that concludes my top 10. But something to keep in mind, these are generalizations, so there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. Not all restaurants, not all Japanese people are like this, so you just got to use this kind of as a guide and play it by ear when you're in Japan. So after hearing my top 10, what do you guys think? Is it weird? Is it something that you guys do in your country, or is it completely the opposite? But if this video did help you out, let me know by hitting that like button. If you want to see more of my adventures in Tokyo or Japan, hit that subscribe.
Have you ever dreamed about making your perfect game? The game to end all games. The big enchilada. But no matter how many times you try, it feels like it's impossible to make. Maybe it's because the idea is so precious to you, but he'd fight creative block. Or perhaps the scope of the game is just too much for one person. Today, I'll share about my dream game, Fuzzites, a creature raiser game inspired by Sonic Adventure's Chow Garden system. I'll also share my failed attempts over the last 11 years and the challenges I faced along the way. So grab your time machines and get ready to go back over a decade to where it all began. But first, I have to give a major shout out to the channel's first official sponsor, Core. Core is an awesome, free new game creation platform that lets you build, publish, and play games. If you're new to making games, Core is a great way to start, especially if you want to quickly set up 3D multiplayer games. And the best part is no coding is needed. You can get started right away using thousands of free, high-quality sounds, art assets, and even music. But if you'd like to be a big boy programmer, Core also lets you create your own game engine logic using Lua. You can build games from scratch, or remix and reimagine content shared by other creators. And when you're ready to publish, your game will go live instantly on the Core platform just with a little click. As I mentioned before, Core takes away all of the hassle that usually goes into making games, such as doing multiplayer networking, which is normally a huge pain. Just trust me on this. In addition, Core recently got a $15 million investment from such as doing multiplayer networking, which is normally a huge pain. Just trust me on this. In addition, Core recently got a $15 million investment from Epic Games and has announced a 50% revenue share with top creators. That's double the share of what Roblox currently has. Core also just announced their latest game jam in partnership with Level 80, the City Building Jam, with 5 diverse categories and dozens of winners and a massive prize pool of $25K. The premise is simple: recreate your favorite real-life city using Core. This jam is a great way to improve and show off your skills, not to mention potentially winning a lot of money. It's nice. And if you're interested, the jam already started. Core is free, so you might as well jump over there and give it a shot. And make sure to check the description for more information. So our story began 11 years ago. At the time, I was extremely obsessed with Sonic Adventures. There was nothing better than rolling around at the speed of sound. But what changed my life forever was when I accidentally walked into the elevator in the first game, and I found it took me to this place called a Chow Garden. And what was so fascinating to me was the breeding mechanic and how you could get different versions of Chow. So to say I fell in love with this game at a young age was an understatement. I was so obsessed. And this was during the heyday of the creature racing genre. You had games like Tamagotchi, Neopets, Chocobo Racing, Monster Rancher, Pokemon. The list goes on and on. But after a while, the genre started to fade away, and there really weren't any games that could rival or even compare to Sonic Adventure. So instead of waiting around for the next big game, I decided that it was up to me to make it myself. So I began to sketch and create pixel art for what would be a franchise of games that would never see the light of day. So obviously I needed some sort of creature, and I came up with the very original idea of Fuzzites, little fuzzy ball rabbit type guys that you could raise, train, and even breed to get different colors or types. Now, because I did so many versions of this game, I'm going to have to kind of talk through each one of these very quickly. Now, my first attempt at Fuzzites was in Game Maker 7. Really what I wanted to do was just recreate Sonic Adventures, but with my own creatures. But I didn't know 3D, so I thought, why not just do a side-scroller 2D game? As you can tell, it was hideous. I didn't know much, and I didn't get very far because at the time, I literally just started programming. I was 13, and there wasn't a whole lot of support for Game Maker, so learning was actually quite difficult. It also didn't help that the computer I worked on didn't have internet, so basically all I had to read was the GMO guide. And let me tell you, it was not a fun experience. It wasn't until quite a few years later that I tried to recreate it using Construct 2. This version of the game was mostly similar, except for you'll notice one thing. The Fuzzites look a little bit different, and you'll notice that this is a trend throughout the years. Now, other than the pretty visuals, I didn't really get super far with this version either. You could pick up, you could pet, you could feed them, but there still wasn't any stats, and this is where I started to run into a little bit of a problem. One of the reasons why the chow mechanic was so fun was because it was a side mechanic. It wasn't the main part of the game. You could run around as Sonic, do your stuff, and then come back and raise a chow. It made the world feel alive, but it was also a nice break from the main gameplay. Now, what I started to notice when I would work on Fuzzites is I made Fuzzites the main mechanic of the game. And that's kind of boring, just waiting around, waiting for something to grow up and having nothing else to do. So to combat this, I tried to make Fuzzites again, but this time in Game Maker Studio. This was a couple years ago before the Stardew Valley genre of games wasn't super popular, so I thought about why don't I make something similar to that. It's a top-down game. You raise your Fuzzites, but then you go out and you talk with people, and maybe there's farming or something. I don't know what I was thinking. I also was inspired by Animal Crossing having a real-time system, and maybe if you played the game around midnight, you could find a secret Fuzzite in the forest. It was really more focused on exploration and looking around and finding resources to give your Fuzzites, which I felt like was a step in the right direction, but ultimately the scope of the game was way too much for the free time that I had at that point. So about a year later, I was messing with Construct again, doing multiplayer stuff. I think I was working on...
Да нет, понимаю. Да наоборот. Да наоборот. Вот нет, наоборот. Да, понимаю.
Whizbirds at the time, and I thought, what if I make Fuzzites, but I make it like a little MMORPG or online game? MMOs tend to be very grindy, so I thought it'd be cool that you could get a different Fuzzite depending on what task you're doing. Say you're woodcutting or you're fishing. That could actually change the look of your Fuzzite, and I felt like this was starting to be a little bit more unique and less generic. I also figured that Fuzzites should have a purpose, so I created this really cool grid-based combat system that, to be honest, I still love to this day. And it's super easy on networking because no one has to see it. Now, out of all the Fuzzite games, this is probably the one I'm going to visit and finish. It's fantastic, and most of the netcode is already established here. And to be honest, I feel like this is one of the most unique ways of having a creature raiser game, but also having social interaction. But at the time, I was working on Whizbirds, and I didn't want to get distracted, so I put the project on the shelf and kind of left it. The last two versions of Fuzzites are more prototypes than anything. The first one I submitted with the help of Janky Bread for the Great Autumn Game Jam that we did last year. You can basically do nothing